And you're welcome along to Off The Brawl, your boxing show here on Off The Ball. We're coming to you this week from all manner of locations, so things might sound a little bit different. Bear with us. The more things change, though, the more they stay the same. We've got the A team in situ. Phil Egan, you're there?
I am, yeah. I'm in the home of the world champion, Katie Taylor.
Oh, yeah. How's life?
Not her home, but in the hometown.
I was going to just brush right past that, but
yeah. No, it's. I saw actually she posted some training tips for anyone that wants to watch them, attempt a few of them because we're going to be stuck indoors for a while. I get a bit of exercise, but yeah, it's all good here. Grand stretch in the evenings now.
That's it. And we also have Andy Lee. Andy, how are things?
Good, all good. At home here in the Liberties in Dublin.
Yeah. I was just thinking you could end up being trainer of the year for 2020 because there might not be any more fights this year.
2 fights, 2 wins.
And how's all in your world anyway? I know it's a shock to the system for everybody, but we haven't caught up with you in a while. So how are you keeping?
I'm good, but everything's just I like everything else. Everything's at a standstill. We were due to fight on March 17th, and Paddy was. On Madison Square Garden on the Conlon undercard. As you know, that all got cancelled, but Paddy was out there because he was flying up early to get used to the time zone. I was supposed to fly out on the Saturday, and I think on the Friday it was cancelled. So that was disappointing, obviously for everybody involved. And since then we haven't trained. I trained Jason during that week. But since then, we've just been like everybody else, just staying at home, following the rules, and hopefully, helping tackle this virus.
And would you still be touching base with them from a boxing standpoint, or is that the furthest thing from their minds at the moment?
No, Paddy's still training, Jason's still training. So we just keep in touch, and it's not a priority right now, is it? It's not, they can do whatever, as much as they want and as less as they want. And we'll just assess it whenever we get back to normal. But it's, it's hard to see, obviously there are huge things, more important things than boxing. But when the virus is over, what way will the landscape be then? What fights that were scheduled will go ahead? Will be rescheduled, or what fights? Will it just be scratched and start from fresh? Who knows? Because everything could be different by then.
Yeah, and it's a strange one. I was talking to Michael Conlon about this last week, where for boxers, this sort of nomadic existence is routine enough. Where if you're in training camp, you have to be on lockdown anyway, eating the right things and just training away, going through a basic day of life. So in one sense, for boxers, it's kind of the norm. But on the flip side, I imagine it must be so hard to be disciplined when you have no firm date in mind, not least for a fight, but even just to return to training camp or anything like that.
Yeah, I think you've seen Michael's baking if you follow him on Instagram. He's cooking cakes and everything. Yeah, it's hard to have that focus and even have any intensity in terms of training. So that's why we're not together. That's why I'm not bothered what they do, even though I do keep in touch. Just as long as they keep it in shape a little bit, that's enough. Because this thing could go on for a long time, and who knows when it's going to be over. Yeah,
for sure. And is your daughter enjoying the quality time?
Yeah, it's tough. She'll be 3 in June, so she doesn't understand. And it's hard. You're not going to explain it to her. So we've just been telling her, the school is closed, creche is closed because everyone's got a cold, and we have to stay indoors. But it's tough for kids, isn't it? She's delighted to be home, even though she misses school and to be with me and her mum. But it is tough, I'm sure. A lot of parents, it's tough. You got to keep them entertained, and it's a lot of work. But it's fun. It's good. Yeah, it's good time. Nice time to be for us to be together.
Yeah.
Spend this time together. And a lot of parents, I'm sure, wouldn't get this time with their kids, so it is nice too.
And we were talking about training regimens there, Phil. I saw you posted a picture of the Egan fitness centre the other day. So how are you getting on?
It's grand. Yeah, I've got the skipping rope, a few weights, and my perfect push-up, which is probably the only thing I've ever bought on an infomercial that's actually worthwhile. Yeah, I
That's
am.
the twist. The twist.
Yeah, they're great.
Yeah, good.
Yeah,
Good,
because so just do sets of just do 10-second break, do 9, 10-second break, 8, all the way down to 1. That's a good one. Like, it's a fairly standard one, but you know, we'll see how long I can keep doing that. And then I see, I think Lidl were selling on special offer those bars that go across the door frame. So that could be the next purchase I have to get. Do maybe every time I go in and out of the sitting room, I have to do a chin up. You know?
Ab roll is good. Ab roll is a good piece of kit. Do you ever use
Yeah.
ab roller?
Oh yeah.
No.
The wheel where you go up and down.
Oh
like that.
yeah.
Tough, but good.
Have you tried the Jolene challenge, Phil?
I haven't actually. No. So just.
That's it. That's your next one. With the perfect push-up, do your Jolene.
Okay. So it's basically just keep doing push-ups, and then when Jolene is done,
stay in a press position, yeah. And whenever she says Jolene in the song, you press up.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. It's grand.
Where did you come up with that one yourself, Andy, or does that one go back a few years?
No, it actually comes from a play. It was a play. Chekhov's first play. There was a little section where it turned into a party and they had this little game. And that's where I got it from.
No, that's good. It's clever. I saw a lot of people trying it out, so I think
yeah, James McLean did it.
It's going to catch on.
Yeah, James McLean.
Oh, and the Fury fight, Andy, we haven't been speaking to you since that happened. I know you were flying around after that happened, but I presume you've had a chance to watch it back a couple of dozen times at this stage, have you?
I've watched it a couple of times. I don't know. I think I watched the fight once in full. My celebrations were certainly excessive, like, but it was good time. It was good, perfect fight, perfect. Like, very rare that something like that works. You know, you have a plan and you work for your plan and you commit to it, but for it to come out and be executed perfectly by Tyson was dream come true. Like, really, as from a coaching point of view. I was very, it was very, how can I say, I felt validated. Or there wasn't a lot of pressure going into it because of obviously recommending Sugar Hill and then being involved as a coach myself. Tyson had done so well in the first fight with Wilder and done so well since that it was really, you know, it was a big risk to change coaches and especially with Sugar Hill, who's, although he's a world championship trainer, is not on the world stage. Wasn't really on the world stage too much, or in people's, I guess, in people's imaginations before then. But I knew he could do the job. I knew how good he was as a coach, and he certainly proved me right. So yeah, it was good. It's very gratifying for myself.
What was it like in the corner? Just obviously with all that in mind, it must be nerve-wracking, which probably explained celebrations after.
Yeah, exactly. Like. Like people are, people calling you from home and messaging, must be unreal and it's great that you're there. And like, really, we could have been anywhere because we were just literally working so hard every day, drilling what you saw in the fight, drilling those moves. And I think like we were living in Henderson, Nevada. We weren't staying in Las Vegas. We weren't we're going to the gym and back, to the gym and back, to the gym and back every single day. And even the fight week, it was just all work and focusing on the job at hand. And in the corner was the exact same. And that's why I had that release that came out at the win when he had won the fight. So, but it was good. Just the same things we do all the time. Same things we've been doing with the lads, with Jason and Paddy, staying focused and rehearsing and drilling what we do.
And I think the tentative plan was that the third fight would be in July if there was to be a third fight, but obviously that's kicked down the road a little bit now. He's probably looking towards the end of the year, or have there been any talks at all about his future plans, Andy?
I've heard some talk about October, but nobody knows which way this thing's going to go, do they? The one thing I said to Tyson is that you did well to get the fight in before this thing kicked off, because no matter what happens now, he can sit pretty on that win, and Wilder has to sit with the loss for a long time. So whenever it happens, he'll be stewing from it. But I think Wilder needs a rest. I think the rest may suit him as well, because he obviously took a lot of damage in the first fight, physically and emotionally. So we'll see. You never know which way it could go. By the
No.
time the schedule like reconvenes, it could be they could just say, let's get Fury and Joshua on, you know. So who knows? We'll see which way it goes.
And even fights that have already fallen by the wayside, like Kelly Avanesian. I know you have ties to the booth camp, and everyone was looking forward to that fight. And it's a fight that fell through before, and it's fallen through again. And it's one of those fights that could be cursed. That might just never happen. And like me and Phil were talking the other day about Lomachenko against Teofimo Lopez, and that was one everyone was looking forward to. But as Lomachenko's getting on a little bit, and if that fight might fall through and never happen either. So it could be a sliding doors moment in boxing. You just never know.
Yeah, it could be. And we could be talking about, you know, fights that was like, that was supposed to be the end of May. Lomachenko and Lopez, and Paddy was supposed to fight on the undercard of that. That was the plan. So all of these things that could have happened or should have happened, but things happen for, obviously things happen. So I believe things happen for a reason, and they work in your favor or they don't. But like, Paddy will just, for Paddy's point of view, he'll just have to stay patient. He's still young, got plenty of time, and whenever it comes back, be ready. Like, it'll be if it takes a year for this to say for boxing to get back, then it will have affected his career in a way, because by the end of this year, we were hoping for Paddy to be around 10-0, around that, 10 or 9 or 11 even fights in total. So it will set him back that he'll have not a bit of catching up to, even though he's still young. It might move things forward a little bit quicker than previously, you know, had this virus not happened.
And Jason as well, particularly unlucky, because he lost a year already through injury, and this could be another full year. And there was plans of that show in May, I believe, on the Katie Taylor Serrano show, that he was going to fight Jack Cullen. So that would have been a nice marketable fight on this side of the water. So it's a shame for him as well. But hopefully it doesn't turn out to be quite as drastic as people are projecting. Well, with no new fights on the horizon, we're going to gaze back in time at matchups of yore. And a few weeks ago, myself and Phil did Ray Robinson against Jake LaMotta. And this week, we turn our attention to perhaps my favourite fight ever. It's Prince Naseem Hamed against Kevin Kelley.
So we get ready to see Prince Naseem come into the ring. Larry Merchant, among the many questions, how do we know if he's for real? How do we specifically know if he can take a punch from a legitimate hard puncher in this division like Kevin Kelley?
We don't know, Jim, and that's why we're here. Is Hamed a prince or a frog?
First 2 minutes of the fight, Hamed is a puzzle that Kelley is unable to solve. But down goes the Prince on Kelley's first serious landed punch.
We all were wondering what was going to happen when he caught a punch from Kelley. We saw it.
His gloves touch the canvas. The count begins. The second knockdown for Kelley. Hard right hand inside by Kelley. There's the power. And Kelley is stunned.
Now we're in a fight.
And Kelley decides to go to war.
If you don't use your jab, and if you don't move your head, we're going to run into difficulties, and I don't want that.
Down goes Kelley on 2 hard left hands. Both fighters down twice in the fight. Blistering right hand by Hamed.
You got to be careful mixing up with Kelley because he can fight.
And that's going to be ruled a knockdown as Naseem's glove grazed the canvas. And a hard left. And Kelley's down for the 3rd time.
And the fight is over.
He's for real. The Prince is for real. Punching power, George. Unquestionably the most memorable fight of 1997.
We have never seen a fight like this in the featherweight division on this level.
So, lads, I think we can take it in turns to pick these fights going forward, but this was always going to be my pick. I think we have it in the podcast intro and everything. So I think, as we'll discuss, Kevin Kelley played his part in the whole thing, but it was very much the Prince Naseem show in terms of his big splash in America. So what were your original thoughts having watched the whole thing back?
I'm thinking back to when I watched Naseem, and he was one of those fighters that, you know, split people because you either loved him or you hated him. But that wasn't necessarily a bad thing, because people were still tuning in, whether they were tuning in to see him win or to see him lose. So what's quite notable, watching the fight back, watch it on HBO, which unfortunately we don't have HBO anymore. And when you actually watch the fight back, you just remember how good big fights were on HBO. But you can almost sense it with the American broadcasters as Prince Naseem he's left Kevin Kelley in the ring for 4 or 5 minutes while he's doing his entrance, and Kevin Kelly's getting really wound up. But you can almost sense it, or with the American commentary, they want to see Prince Naseem fail here because he's coming over. This is his big debut. Here he is with his ridiculous entrance. At one stage, Larry Merchant says, "Is it a fashion show or a prize fight?" And eventually he comes in, and it's 4 rounds, but the amount of action they got into that 4 rounds, and Naseem won, and he gave his interview after. But I can't help but think when I look back that after that, then obviously the split with Brendan Ingle, and if you sum up, or if you're asked what was Prince Naseem like, he definitely didn't fulfill his potential. Now, I think at the time I was probably on the side of I'd like to see him maybe get beaten because he's a little bit too cocky. Obviously, that's something that endeared him to you, Ron. Yeah.
Well, it's that Muhammad Ali thing, especially in the earlier part of his career, where he didn't mind why you were watching him as long as you were watching him. And Hamed had that thing where he wanted people to tune in. And my memory of him is a bit sort of retroactive, where I just remember my dad having people over to watch the fights, and I thought he was just another like The Rock or Stone Cold Steve Austin character. I didn't realize this was actually real. And it's actually come back and watching the fights in more recent years, I realized like what an impact he actually made. Andy, would you have been a fan of his on your way up?
I grew up watching him. Why was this why did you choose this fight? Why is this one of your favorite fights, Ronan?
Well, just because the drama around it, which we'll get into, there was a lot of preamble in terms of Lou DiBella making the big pitch to get him over, and sometimes these fights fall a little bit flat from the proactive point of view, where like even with Joshua Ruiz, that was supposed to be his big coming out party against Miller, and ultimately it turned out to be quite the opposite. The balloon was burst, whereas I thought this was like a brilliant sales pitch for Hamed in America, and you can see how enthused George Foreman was by the whole thing on commentary, Larry Merchant and Jim Lampley. So I just thought it was very captivating, and it was probably, like, when it's all said and done, the highlight of what was quite a highlight reel career. Short is like his career burned brightly, but it was quite short ultimately.
Yeah, they probably wanted him to lose, Larry Merchant being the old school guy, but I think they had a job to sell him to the American public as well, because he had signed a contract with HBO, so I think they were trying to give him a bit of a push as well in terms of he's the real deal, and there was some stuff George Foreman was saying, this is the Prince of Power and things like that. But I think personally they wanted him to lose because they didn't like the cockiness. Like when I think back to before I watched it for this, you think about the fight, you just think, oh yeah, it was exciting. Like when you try to summarize the fight, it was an exciting fight. Both were up and down, but Nas boxed and won and knocked him out, and it was a great win for Nas. But actually watching the fight again now through, I haven't watched it in years, I thought Nas looked really bad. I thought the signs were there that was going to eventually happen to him when he stepped in with quality again. And I thought Kevin Kelley was probably the better fighter, just too old and too sharp one. And yeah, I didn't even think Nas looked that good. And it's funny because when I remember the fight, it was a spectacular fight, a lot of action, and Nas had a great win. But actually watching it, I thought he landed some shots on unorthodox, awkward punches, offbeat, with a different rhythm, and he knocked down and knocked out an older fighter who was probably the better fighter, more skilled. That's just what I saw this time watching it, And I think you could see that, with him pulling out with his head high, it seems to have, even when you look at the Barrera fight, a very weak neck. Like anytime he got hit, his head would actually fly back to where he'd almost be whiplashed. But pulling back in straight lines with his head high, and you can't really do that. Not at world class.
Yeah, and that stuff would always be pigeonholed as the Ingle style, quote unquote. Like Brendan Ingle, obviously a very impactful coach from this part of the world, but went to Britain and really made his mark over there. Like, if you had to define the Ingle style just from an outsider looking in, what are the characteristics of that style, and why is that term used so much?
I don't even know if it's that much of a thing anymore, is it? Especially with Dom now coming in. But certainly the Brendan style was reflexes, wasn't it? It was hands by your side and switch hitting and throwing punches from awkward angles at using a rhythm, an offbeat rhythm where you punch your opponent when they're not expecting it, and punching from and leaping in from a distance. And it's great if it works for you, and it probably did for and it obviously did a lot of world championships from the gym and a lot of success. But even now, I think it's been around for so long that it's become predictable. It's not become it's not really a thing anymore where Kid Galahad or Kell Brook or those guys where you think they're really awkward fighters. They fight with that style, but it's something that we've been used to seeing now. It's not something that's completely separate from because obviously back when those guys came out in the 90s, say like Johnny Nelson, Prince Naseem, Ryan Rhodes, later on Junior Witter, everyone fought with their hands up in their box. They were classical fighters at the highest level, but then these guys would come out with their hands down, wide stance, switch hitting, and counter punching from with their hands down. It was a real thing back then, but nowadays it's not. People have seen it, and it's not that unusual.
Mm. But I would say it had a bit of a generational impact. Like, you hear all the boxers from the latest generation talking about the impact that Hamed had on them. So even it mightn't seem like seamless comparisons, but Carl Froch always says he fights with his hands down because he watched Hamed coming through. David Hay fought the same way, with his hands down. And even going to Adam Booth's gym, obviously David Hay is an exponent to that, but Josh Kelly, I would say, is very similar in his movement to the way Naseem did. Maybe a little bit more conventional, but he's kind of going for that same thing, like punching from odd angles. So I do think there has been an impact, even if Brendan Ingle's obviously passed on and Dominic hasn't quite carried on the exact same legacy. But I think it has trickled down to the rest of British boxing, I think.
Yeah, it's definitely. But it became, prevalent, became well known, that style, even though it probably was around before then, they made it famous. And that's their style. That's the Ingle. It's always going to be the Ingle style now. And
Emmanuel Stewart obviously had Naseem for a brief period as well. Did he ever talk about him, or was it a very fleeting relationship?
No, he spoke about him. Just like, the thing is, you compare this to Anthony Joshua's New York, whatever. Anthony Joshua got beat when he fought an American fighter, and Naseem almost got beat. And I've always said, we've said it before on the show, that when British fighters travel to America, only the very best will hold up and win. An average American fighter will beat some of the best from England and Ireland because just the standard is so much higher over there. There's so much depth in the gyms. The competition is so fierce that just to be good in America would probably put you at the best in Ireland and England anyway, So, that was just another example of that. And Naseem got away with it because he was powerful, because he was in with the right guy, someone who was just a bit too old, just over past his best. But Emmanuel, speaking about, Emmanuel, he expressed a lot of, disdain, and he was disappointed in Naseem, the way it ended up. If you remember correctly, how Emmanuel ended up training him Emmanuel was in England for I'm not sure if he was commentating or he was doing there with some other fighter or something. But when Naseem fought Paul Ingle, I think it was in the next fight or the fight after Kelly. It was certainly within 2 fights. He came back into England and he fought Paul Ingle, and he was having a really hard time in the fight, and he was probably losing the fight. And in between rounds, Emmanuel went up to the corner and said something to Naz directly. I think it was something simple. I can't remember exactly what it was, but he went out that round and knocked him out with the very same punch or combination, whatever it was. And then from then on, Emmanuel became his coach. And it's probably one of the biggest, I don't know, not tragedies, but it's probably one of the saddest things that happened in British boxing was that Naseem and Brendan Ingle split, separated and went separate ways. And even though he was with Emmanuel, I think leaving Brendan certainly took away from him, because they had that bond, that relationship. And I think when you've been with somebody that long, no matter how good the new coach is coming in, you never will replace that, that kind of instinct of knowing your boxer and a coach, knowing how to read him, how to motivate him. I think that was probably, certainly was a bad move for Naz, even though he was going to probably one of the best trainers of all time. There just wasn't that relationship. And Emmanuel used to say that he never wanted to spar. He used to bring his own sparring partners to the Crown Gym or to the Poconos, and they were all kids, like 14 and 15-year-old kids. He never wanted to spar anybody from the gym, and he just wanted to hit the pads and do pads all the time. And you saw it. I can't remember that documentary that was out. It's been a long time ago since I saw it, which was around the Brera fight. And it seemed like he was so concerned, and came, he was a superstar, but he really believed it, and all of that affected him. And he paid the price in the end. But look, is he a great fighter? He had a great impact, didn't he? He was a household name in England and Ireland, and he had a great impact, and people still remember him and reference him when they see a similar knockout or a similar style. So he certainly had an impact, but I'm not sure if he was, like you said, he never fulfilled his potential, but I'm not sure if he was a great fighter.
And Phil, in terms of the captivation of him, it was a short era that he had, but as compared to, say, the Ben Eubank era, and then we've seen the Ricky Hatton days, followed by the Anthony Joshua days. From a UK perspective, I'm talking about, how did the Hamed thing feel? Did you get the impression that people were tuning in to see him getting beaten, or did he have a fan base?
Well, it's funny, you mentioned about people being around to the house, and I think the first pay-per-view fight I got into my house, now I would have seen pay-per-view fights before, but my group of mates, we almost would have taken it in turns, and especially it suited us to go to different houses, especially if there were fights from the US. But I can remember the Tom Boom Boom Johnson fight, and that was the first pay-per-view one where the lads all came around to watch it, and the feeling that night was a lot of lads in the room wanted to see Naseem lose because of that cockiness. There was a friend of mine who, out of all of us, was probably biggest into boxing, and I felt we had the same kind of feeling around Eubank fights, where a lot of people wanted to see Eubank lose, but this same guy wanted to see Eubank win. He was the same guy that wanted to see Naseem win. So he really wanted these kind of characters in boxing, these entertainers bringing something different to the table. But yeah, it was quite clear watching the fight back that it wasn't he got the job done. But if you even look at the first round, he starts off quite well. His jab is working pretty well. Then he's exiting out of having Kevin Kelley in the corner, leaves his head there, and he gets put down. And what I can remember from that fight, from the fight as well, was the referee calling him up a few times for touching the canvas with his gloves, which I think one of them was very minimal, was quite harsh. But yeah, just from watching the fights among my group of friends, there was definitely a feeling of they wanted to see Naseem knocked out. Now, sometimes that can come down to the way he's hyped up. He obviously would have started off on ITV, but then Sky took over pay-per-view. They hype him up, and people, whether they want to admit it or not, some people want to see people get put back in their box.
And just on your point there, the background is interesting in the sense that, so he cleaned up as an amateur. The story goes that Brendan Ingalls saw him on a schoolyard having a fight at the age of 7 and just took him to the gym, and he was cleaning up all the way underage, turned pro very early, won the European title when he was 20, and then was world champion at 21, beat Steve Robinson in Cardiff. So I think people forget that he was only 23 when he did this against Kevin Kelley. That was his 5th fight in 1997, which is unheard of for a world champion. Can you imagine a world champion these days taking on 5 fights? So I was listening to Lou DiBella talking about the whole thing, and Andy Liu was head of HBO's boxing output at that time, so he was deciding who the next guys were going to be. And I think Kevin Kelley, ironically, Boxing After Dark on HBO, which is trying to showcase maybe the lower weights, Kevin Kelley was the first fighter, I think at 126 pounds or lower in 11 years to fight on HBO. So he had his own part of the story as well, in the sense that he was the perfect marketing guy for this, a New Yorker in New York who built his name at the theatre in Madison Square Garden. And people will remember that famous interview on the ring apron. Kevin Kelley basically flew over with Tom Loeffler, who Andy also knows, who's now famous for managing Gennady Golovkin. They booked 2 plane tickets. They went over to a Naseem Hamed fight and like basically called him out there. And then they had this very famous exchange on the apron. And the rest was history. This was marketing 101 in a day before social media and everything. There was just posters all around New York. Paulie Malignaggi talks about seeing posters of Naseem Hamed at Times Square. So HBO did a great job, and as Phil mentioned earlier, they are a big loss to the sport. So it was a great promotion. I think that's a key point to make as well.
Yeah, and like it was like with Anthony Joshua, it was the perfect like roadmap, you know. Even with him, like what they tried to replicate with Anthony Joshua just didn't go to plan in terms of the fight at 7. It almost did, but it didn't. But in terms of where you're gonna like to come to America and now just it's Madison Square Garden, you know, it's the perfect place to do it. And yeah, people still talked about it. And like, look at us, we're talking about that fight now. What was it, 97? So how long ago was that? Too long. But
and
like,
even like on the point, so Kevin Kelley, as I said, one of the lighter fighters on HBO in an awful long time. But then you look at the decade which followed, like Hamed, we talk about Deontay Wilder, where his power comes from. Like with Hamed, you can see with those big legs that's where the power came from with him. But he basically put the lighter divisions on the map, or back on the map, because in the decade which followed, it was Mayweather Pacquiao, granted a little bit heavier, but small.
No,
guy.
but like he opened the door because he beat him, and then Barrera has those fights with, you know, Morales and whoever, and then eventually with Pacquiao. But he definitely opened the door for lighter weights to be, you know, headline TV events.
Yeah, and I think Phil mentioned the ring walk initially, and something I wasn't aware of until I was reading about this was that went awry. It wasn't supposed to be as long as it was. The silhouette at the start, so if people want to watch this fight back, he's basically standing behind a silhouette with a shadow, and that thing is supposed to set on fire and drop down, and he's supposed to walk out, but it takes so long for that to happen that he just says, to hell with this, and he just walks out through. So as long as it was definitely part of the game plan to make Kelley wait in the ring a little while, but not quite as long. And Frank Warren cites it after the fight as an issue. Maybe Hamed came in a little bit cold and whatnot. But did you ever have suffer any of those psychological ploys from an opponent, Andy? Were you ever left waiting in the ring overly long?
No, I was always like, for the most of the fights, I was the A side, so I'd always be walking last. But I always made a point not to do it to my opponents, because I always found it really disrespectful, and I always made a point that no, let's just get in there and get this done. There's no point. But question for you guys, off the top of your head, best ring walk, what are you thinking of all time?
I did enjoy Tyson's one a few weeks ago, and I have to say, although you subsequently said you didn't have much to do with that. If that was me, I would have been taking all the credit for that.
No, I actually didn't know how it was going to play out. He just came up with it one day over dinner or lunch or something. He was explaining it and how he was going to do it, and I couldn't. Like, I thought, oh, it's not going to be great. But I was wrong. Came out really, really well, and it was pure performance, wasn't it? Pure theatre, like, you know.
I liked Bernard Dunn's against Cordoba, and I liked Carl Froch's against Lucian Bute, Phil, which we always reference. No easy way out.
It's because of the music as well. I can remember Pacquiao came in with Jimmy Jemison singing Survivor, or Eye of the Tiger, rather.
I think Pacquiao sang himself into the ring one time, didn't he?
Yeah.
Was that Tim Bradley when he sang before the fight, I think? Can't remember.
Naseem's one against McCullough, that was Halloween.
Yeah.
That wasn't bad now. That was kind of almost like had a hint of Michael Jackson Thriller or something to it. But yeah, ring walks.
Klitschko's pretty good.
Yeah.
Chili Peppers gets it going.
Yeah, well, do you know what, when you hear that song, it's the first thing I think of is Klitschko. So that's pretty, like, I mean, I can't think of any. I'm sure that there's plenty out there that people are probably screaming at the the radio now, just thinking, how could you forget this one? So feel free to put them in.
Tyson's done some good ones now, though.
Yeah.
Living in America was pretty good. The Mexican run.
Did you have
Parade
any?
was pretty good.
Were there any of your own that you enjoyed, Andy?
Nah, I never even picked it. Very rarely that I picked a song. I just like put on whatever you want and just walk out and fight, you know. But a couple of times I picked a song. It's always in hindsight you think I should have played that song, you know. But
we ever walking in though? We ever walking in thinking, Jesus, who picked that song?
Yeah,
that's going to make me look bad.
Couple times. I remember Aaron Pryor fought in Detroit, Aaron Pryor Jr., and they put on Who Let the Dogs Out. he was so embarrassed when he was walking to the ring.
Baha Man.
Yeah, one of your favourites, Phil.
Oh yeah, have the record somewhere.
Just to put some shape on this to round things up. So as we said, only 4 rounds, but it kind of flew by. There was no real pattern apart from round 3, which kind of developed a little bit of a rhythm. But round 1, it was as if things were too easy for Naseem Hamed. He was kind of boxing a little bit conventionally and then leaning back, gets caught, and that kind of sets that lights the touch paper for the rest of the fight. It gets crazy after that, really. Like in terms of 2 southpaws, Andy, with like that's obviously an issue as well, and obviously 2 punchers in there together. Did you ever have that dynamic where you're up against a southpaw, but also someone you're like, I kind of have to keep an eye out for this guy who punches quite hard?
John Jackson was a little bit like that and switched. You know, he switched stances and obviously punching very hard. And obviously Quillen and Saunders even. You're dangerous yourself, but you're vulnerable. So it is risky. Sometimes you just let it all hang out, as Kevin Kelley did and paid the price. Like sometimes. It's usually the younger man who has a slightly better reflexes in those split seconds that it makes a difference between who lands and who goes down.
Yeah.
But another note about the fight: Benji Estevez was the referee.
Great ref.
Same ref as Jackson and same ref as Daniels.
Oh yeah.
New York ref, yeah. So he's always good luck for me. Him and Steve Smoger.
Oh, Steve Smoger.
When I had those guys.
Great clash.
Smoger didn't take any nonsense. So Kelly gets the first knockdown in round 1, gets another knockdown in round 2. It looks like the tide's very much turning there. Hamed gets what looked like a legitimate knockdown, but it was ruled a slip by Benji. And then
did it hit the back of the head, do you think? Is that why?
Maybe, but I think he just thought that Kelly lost his footing. But I think the commentary team on Sky and HBO both thought it should have been a knockdown. So it didn't turn out to be a big factor in the fight as things turned out. Then he does catch him with a nice shot, and there's a great line from Larry Merchant, as if cinematic delivery. He says, Hamed is supposed to have power of his own. We haven't seen evidence of that as yet. And then within a second, he lands that short right hand and puts Kelly down, and Kelly looks up at Hamed with the smile on his face. Would you describe that as a flash knockdown, Andy? And I always want to, because I always use this term, flash knockdown, but what does it actually feel like as compared to a legitimate knockdown?
Well, a flash knockdown is you're down, but you're up and you're totally fine. You feel fine. It's like, how did that happen? But the heavy knockdown is like, you're buzzing, your feet, you're not recovered, you don't have control of yourself, and you're trying to stay calm. But I wouldn't know. I think that was a good flush punch, wasn't it? It was a really good flush because, and what he did, he stepped back onto his left leg, and so he got you mentioned Naseem's legs. His power was in his legs, and he punched from his feet up. He would often, he knocked out several guys leaping in with uppercuts, but this one, he just stepped back onto his back foot and launched it from the toe all the way through the hip and just put it on the chin. And I think the connection looked, why it might have been a flash knockdown was the connection was just so little, but it came from the foot. So that's where the power was from. Really, Kelly, if Kelly was more disciplined and a little bit tactically more aware, he would have won the fight. Could have won the fight, should have won the fight, because he had the power to hurt Naz, he had the skill and the hand speed, but he just doesn't have the discipline or probably the game plan. Or, I would say discipline was definitely more a problem, because after that early success, if he just stayed behind his jab and not traded with Naz would have had to get desperate and would have had to, come into him, and he would have caught him again, but just stayed behind that jab and, attack Naz in straight lines after Naz punched, because that's what Barrera did. Naseem had all these would throw all these wild punches. Barrera kept his hands up in the solid, and then he attacked him in straight lines because Naz always pulled back high.
Yeah, as Phil Burgess said, Kelly's coach said, if he leaps, he sleeps about Hamed, and the whole thing, as you said, was to keep Kelly disciplined, take Hamed into the later rounds and maybe stop him there. But Kelly came in with 32 knockouts and probably thought if he hurt him once, he'd be able to put him away. And sometimes you can get drunk on your own power, I presume.
You can't change your personality, your personality and how you fight, the style in which you fight and your personality. They're like, they're one and the same. You can't change it. Yeah. And
you can't change it for one performance.
I don't know. I don't know. I think you have to have some sort of, I don't know. I don't know. It's just that New York, fly, that kind of New York attitude. I don't know. You see him straight away with his girlfriend or his wife in the ring after, and it's just that the cockiness. Kevin Kelley is actually a gentleman, and I've met him like plenty of times and spoke to him and like talked about fights and things like that together, both being southpaws. But yeah, I don't want to be speaking ill of him. I hope I'm not, but I think he probably, if he was a little bit more disciplined, he would have won that fight.
He said it after the fight when Larry Merchant interviewed him. He said, "I'm my worst enemy. I deviated. If I just stuck to the plan, I could have won this fight." But it's interesting when he does that. You mentioned there, his wife is by his side when he's doing that interview, and she looks more upset than Kevin Kelley. She's just more disgusted with him, thinking he didn't stick to the game plan. He could have beaten this guy, because Naseem looked so untidy at times in that fight. When he was trying to duck out of the way, he was all like, his hands obviously were touching the canvas, but he was falling over, especially in the second round when he went down. He actually went down and the ref didn't count it. He's kind of stumbled across and then he got put down again. So yeah, it wasn't very impressive. It was almost like this is the first time you've seen Naseem really tested, and he might have got the win, but yeah, it was maybe a sign of what was to come. And then obviously,
I thought Kevin Kelley's corner did a nice job. I thought Brendan Ingram was very good in the corner too. From the little bit you can see from the footage, both corners were, I thought, given the right instruction to their fighters, both very calm. And Kevin's corner, once the fight was over and there was all the chaos and people jumping in, all his priority was to get his corner back, get his fighter back to the corner and get him some water and give him some space, because he knew that his fighter had just been knocked down pretty heavily, and that impressed me.
And one more good commentary line. Well, there's actually loads in this fight. I'm sure you have your own favorites. Lampley says, "Hamed breaks so many rules of textbook boxing. It's as if not only has he not read the book, he hasn't looked at the table of contents." So that kind of gives people an idea of what the American perspective of Naseem was. Round 3, as I said, was kind of the most normal round of the whole thing, where you could actually see a little bit of tactics going on. But round 4 ultimately closed the thing. Brendan Ingle in the corner before round 4, Andy, says he's had his fun now about Kelley, and then Hamed goes out and finishes the job. And I thought Kelley was gone after the first knockdown in that round, and he gets a little reprieve when he manages to knock Hamed down, or his glove touches the canvas. Benji rules it a knockdown. But you can see throughout that count that Hamed is just looking at Kelley. He knows he has him there, and he just goes in and finishes the job. He jumps in with a brilliant shot, and that's a highlight reel knockout, which has been played. It's done the rounds on Sky for the last 23 years for a reason.
Yeah, and I do think Benji said was slightly biased in favour of Kelley. I think he was giving him every chance he could, and especially he ruled out one knockdown, and he there was one when Naz was knocked out, where he counted Naz, but it could have been easily a slip, where you mentioned touching the floor. But like, it was probably like, even though if it was me as a fight, I wouldn't be happy with my performance or the way I won the fight because of the ups and downs and looking vulnerable. But in terms of announcing yourself to the USA, in terms of an excitement and HBO and convincing them that the lighter weights their value.
Yeah.
It was probably the perfect fight.
Yeah. And Phil, Larry Merchant described it as the Hagler Hearns of featherweight boxing. We've never seen a fight like this in the featherweight division, so that's high praise.
Yeah, and Larry was coming out with some absolute dingers all night. Even before the fight started, he after the fight is over, then obviously George Foreman declares the Prince is for real. But Larry Merchant said before the fight, just as about to start, we're going to find out now if he's a prince or a frog. So, and I was also, when I was watching the fight, I was thinking, could you imagine how big Naseem could have been if there was social media around then? Like he was big, but he was made for the social media era where he would just be absolutely huge. Michael Buffer was emceeing. Michael Buffer, when he intros Prince Naseem, he gives Ministry of Sound a shout out. I don't know if you picked up on that. And he basically said, the music that Nas walked into was brought to you by Ministry of Sound. And he gives their new album a plug. So Adidas obviously were heavily on board on that as well, which we mentioned the shots that would have been in New York, all the pictures, they would have had Adidas sponsorship. So he was huge, but I can't imagine how big he would have been with social media on board. And Larry Merchant said he came out with some belters throughout the night. But 4 minutes or 4 rounds of madness, really.
Yeah, and Larry Merchant, if people stay right to the end of this video, I'll put the link in the description, but he references Chumbawamba as well at the end of that telecast as well, Phil. So people have to tune in to see what the context is there. We talked to Owen a few weeks ago, Phil, about the LaMotta Robinson fight, and obviously that's a wholly different era. But was there anything that stood out to you about this fight from 23 years ago as opposed to a similar fight now?
No, I think it's something we touched on, because the way boxing is always categorized with weight, that styles can change, but physiques, they can't really differ that much because there's only so much you're obviously limited at what you can weigh, so you can't, like he was a 5'3" featherweight. We mentioned he got a lot of his power from his legs. Kevin Kelley was 5'7", he had a 6-inch reach advantage, but watching it, you wouldn't have really thought it at the time, even though Kelly's corner said before the fight, if our fighter jabs and his reach is too big, you can't see how Naseem is going to get inside him. But no, it was, I'm trying to think of a fight that it was similar to in the modern era, when it seems, 23 years ago seems like a long time ago, but as I said, it was quite scrappy. So the only really structured round was the third round, as you mentioned there. But no, it had what you want from a big fight. It had, obviously, Naseem came over to New York saying, this is what I'm going to do. He said he was going to finish it in the third round, did it in the fourth round. Booed in because he took so long to come in. We haven't even mentioned, one thing I did love about Naseem was his flip over the rope, where I just thought, it's so ballsy, because if it goes wrong, he's going to look like an absolute idiot. And he's doing it in front of thousands of people. Now, if it went wrong, I'm sure he'd laugh it off. But did it ever go wrong? I think probably footage of maybe it going wrong very early in his career or something like that. But it's a fight that, as I said, if we watched it in 2020 or 2021, it wouldn't look out of place.
And Andy, I presume that's the beauty of now with your training hat on. There's probably stuff you can take from fights all down through the years. In a way, probably football coaches can't, because the game has moved on. In its essence, boxing has remained pretty much the same.
Yeah, slight changes, and changes in like styles of, they kind of got, like, say, like you had when Muhammad Ali was world champion. What grew out of that was the fighters from the 80s who all tried to fight like him, like Leonard and Hagler, and fighters who had that bouncing rhythm, and they would shoot the jab, Larry Holmes, And then along came Mike Tyson, and then everyone wanted to fight in the crowd to be, rolling that custom style, coming up with hooks. And now, from this day and age, and still probably is still the Mayweather, where everyone wants to fight behind their shoulder and catch shots, and you see people doing the pads, and you don't know why they're doing the pads like that, but that's to see Mayweather do it, so they're doing it. And I wonder who will be the next, you know. But generally, your point is right. Fighters have gotten bigger. I think throughout, athletes get bigger and stronger, and across all sports, but in boxing as well. You look at the heavyweights now compared to Muhammad Ali, who was 6'3". You know, Tyson Fury was 6'8", 6'9". So even though Muhammad Ali was the greatest heavyweight of all time, hard to see him beating Tyson just because of the size and ability of Tyson. And yeah, but like Jake LaMotta and Ray Robinson, those guys were like 5'10", you know, 5'6". Most middleweights nowadays are all over 6 foot, you know, 6 foot plus. So, but like you said, there's still two men with two hands, and you can go all the way back to John L. Sullivan, and you'll find the same thing and things that they did that can be used today.
And just to put a cap on this, finally, with Hamed and Kelley, the highest rating ever for a debut on HBO Boxing, and that record will probably never be broken because HBO Boxing is a thing of the past, unfortunately. 4 years later, Hamed was beaten by Barrera at age 27, and then at age 28, he was done. So the Kelley fight probably should have been a bit of a wake-up call, and he needed to tidy up a few things, but he never really addressed things. In fact, like, he never really had an impressive performance after that. Wayne McCullough took him the distance. He was taking the distance as well by Soto, I think. So there was acrimony in the Engel camp. The Manny Stewart thing didn't quite work out either. So he was voted a Hall of Famer last year, and it was probably on the strength of a very brief period at the top. But like, his impact, the fact that we're still talking about him 2.5 decades on, probably stands to reason that he is in the Hall of Fame, I'd say.
Yeah, he crossed over, didn't he? He was a household name, and it's because of those things that were mentioned, as much as the boxing, personality, the character, the outlandishness, the ring entrances, and his commercial appeal. And so, I think he, on the whole of things, probably was a great fighter in terms of the impact he made. But it's still an argument to be had there.
And Phil, from your perspective, this fight in particular, plus his career generally, is it worth people revisiting that aren't familiar, having a look back at his career?
Yeah, I think this fight in particular, but you know, it probably doesn't show him in his best light because he obviously gets put down a few times, but he was stepping up in quality. This he said after the fight, he said in the ring, you could actually hear him say to Kevin Kelley, "You're the best I've ever fought," and he kindly said about himself as well, "I'm the best you've ever fought." But what was interesting, like the famous comments from Brendan Engel after they split, he said 4 more fights and he's finished. Now, he had a few more than that, but the writing was on the wall. He did have, I think, at the time, it fitted in nicely for people of my age where, you know, boxing was becoming more prevalent on TV. We got to see boxing growing up, but Sky obviously took over and there was more big fight nights that we were getting to see. Obviously, it was behind a paywall, but at the time, the pay-per-view wasn't as steep as it is now. It wasn't as often as it is. So he had a huge impact, and I think definitely worth checking out this fight. Even check out you could take it in cycles, that you could watch some of his early stuff where he's knocking out lads, just some of the angles that he throws punches in. Now, he mightn't have been up against the greatest opponents, but then maybe watch the Kevin Kelley fight, watch the McCullough fight, and watch the Barrera fight. And then, you know, you get a fair idea of the way things went. That, you know, obviously he was knocking out lads handy enough. Then as the quality went up, he was finding it tougher, and ultimately it pretty much ended when he got outclassed by Barrera. He won fight after it, and then that was him done.
Great stuff, lads. Well, that's our thoughts on the whole thing. We'll put the link in the description. We'll let people make their own minds up. Andy or Phil will be picking the next one. I think Phil had mentioned a bit of Joe Calzaghe against Jeff Lacey might be on the cards. Is that right, Phil? It's one that I've watched a few times. That was a
Go obscure, Phil. Go obscure.
What? Go obscure. Like someone that we used to watch maybe with Russian commentary, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I'll see if we can go obscure then.
It's
What's
like
your-
you're on YouTube.
Maybe a fight we've never seen.
What's your fight, Andy, of choice? What fight would you have watched more than any other, would you say?
Oh, it would have been classic, like one of the classics fights. Maybe Hearns and Leonard, or Leonard and Duran won, or maybe Hearns and Duran, or Hearns and Shula, even though that was only a 1-round fight. Off the top of my head, I think one we could do is Juan Manuel Lopez against Robert Mutanga. It was a great fight, featherweight fight again. Southpaw, and like I was at the fight, I can remember it being an unbelievable fight. And from what I can remember, there was a good few knockdowns in it, and I won't tell you the winner for the spoilers.
Yeah, I think Showtime last weekend were showing Israel Vasquez against Juan Manuel Marquez, one after the other, the entire trilogy. So that's probably another one we can look at. There's plenty. It looks like we're going to have loads of time on our hands over the next few months anyway, so we'll get through a few of them. Thanks again, lads. Thanks.
Cheers, lads.
Thank you.